Hello and welcome back to AMC Presents. I'm your host and editor, William Ford. Today's episode features a compelling and thought-provoking conversation with Dr. Stanley Romanstein, a distinguished professor of musicology and former dean of the University of Cincinnati's College-Conservatory of Music. With more than 2 decades of leadership in both higher education and the professional arts world, he has served as president and CEO of the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, the Minnesota Humanities Center, and the Baltimore School for the Arts. At Georgia State University's Creative Media Industries Institute, his work focused on building dynamic partnerships between the university and Georgia's thriving music industry. In our conversation, Dr. Romanstein shares his bold vision for the future of classical music. He challenges conventional thinking and invites us to reimagine what's possible in the arts. If you care about where classical music is headed, you'll want to stick around. Before we dive in, a quick reminder: AMC is your destination for insightful classical music content. If you value what we do, consider supporting us at patreon.com/Atlanta Music Critic. Every contribution at any level helps us grow and continue our mission. And of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from you. Now, let's get to know Dr. Stanley Romanstein.
It's good to see you again.
It's good to see you, William. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Sure. As you know, I am a psychologist,
Yeah.
and so I like to explore a bit about famous people's backgrounds to help other people understand the road to success. So in your case, as I understand it, you were born in Charleston, South Carolina,
Charleston, South Carolina,
and lived there until you went to undergraduate school.
until I went to undergraduate school, yes.
So how did you get interested in music?
William, I think it's fairly common for artists to know who they are fairly early on. Over my career, I've spent a lot of time talking with high school students, and I frequently ask them, when did you know that you were a dancer, an actor, a violinist? And the answer is almost always something like, well, when I was 3 or when I was 4, or, well, I started late. I didn't pick up the instrument until I was 7. Artists know fairly early on that that's who they are and that that's the way they're going to make their ways through the world. I'm a singer, and I have these distinct memories of being a young child at my grandparents' house for a holiday. I was sitting in the living room on the floor with several of my cousins playing and doing what young kids do. And the adults were walking around, getting food and drink and whatnot. My aunts and uncles and great aunts and uncles, big family. And I don't remember exactly what happened, except that at some point, somebody gave a pitch and all of the adults started to sing. And I remember sitting there on the floor and looking up and hearing this sound. They were singing in 3 and 4 part harmony, and they sang patriotic songs, they sang art songs, they sang they sang all kinds of things, and they sort of moved from one to another. And I remember sitting there and thinking that this was the most glorious thing, and I wanted to grow up to do that. I wanted to be a part of that. And I've spent the rest of my life being a part of that, and being a singer, being a conductor, being an administrator, in my mind, is all being a part of that great enterprise of living life as an artist.
All right. I didn't know you were a singer.
I am.
So you went to undergraduate school in voice?
Yes, yes.
And where did you go to undergraduate school?
I went to a little liberal arts college, Carson Newman College, great Southern liberal arts.
And where's that located?
It's in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And then you went beyond that?
Yes. I earned a master's degree in conducting, and a Ph.D. in musicology at the College-Conservatory of Music at the University of Cincinnati.
And I understand your area of specialization was Monteverdi?
Music of the late Renaissance and early Baroque in northern Italy. So Monteverdi is one of my passions. I teach courses on Monteverdi, but most of what I've written and spoken about is music at the turn of the Renaissance into the Baroque, the beginnings of opera, the change in sacred music from the Palestrina style to the Monteverdi style.
In a nutshell, how did that transition take place?
It actually took place because of Martin Luther, not intentionally, in my opinion. When Martin Luther began the Reformation, the church, held a council, the Council of Trent, from 1545 to 1563, if you want to be very precise about it, and said, what are we going to do about this? How do we counter this Reformation? How do we bring people back into the church? And one of the things that they said was, we need music that is simpler and that focuses on text, that the words are easy to understand, easy to hear, and easy to remember. And that really is the shift between the Renaissance style with all these wonderful flowing lines tripping on top of one another into a style that really has a solo voice with minimal accompaniment. That's the beginnings of the Baroque era, which leads us to opera and other wonderful manifestations. But it really happened because of Martin Luther.
Well, that was a good summary.
I have courses worth of material on that shift between Renaissance and Baroque, but I'm going to spare you.
Now the students won't have to go to it. They can just
Exactly.
watch
They
this.
can just get the Cliff Note version right here off your podcast.
So how did you get into the focus on administration and management?
I began my teaching career at St. Lawrence University in Northern New York, wonderful liberal arts institution in a beautiful, beautiful spot of the world. And early on in my tenure at St. Lawrence, the university's dean saw something in me that I had not yet seen in myself, and that is an ability to lead. So very quickly after I arrived, with the support of all of my faculty colleagues, the dean facilitated my being appointed as chair of the Department of Music. And I held that post for 9 years, my entire time at St. Lawrence. And the interesting thing is, in doing that, the dean gave me an opportunity to sit at the university's decision-making tables, along with historians and philosophers and biologists and chemists. And through being in a liberal arts environment and having a seat at those decision-making tables, I learned how to talk about the arts in language that people who are not artists can understand and appreciate. And that experience of being able to talk about the arts and what's important about the arts in language that non-artists can understand has paved the path for everything else that I've done in my career.
That makes sense. If you were to set out to design a symphony orchestra from scratch, what would you do, particularly on the management side? How would you structure it? How would you water it so that it would grow into something major?
Let me talk about it this way, William, and if I'm going too far afield or not getting to what you want me to talk about, let me know. When you and I were talking about today's podcast, one of the things that you asked me to think about was how funding has changed over, you said 50 years, but in essence, over my lifetime. And how funding is developed. And I thought I should thank you for giving me the opportunity to think about that, because it had been a while since I'd sort of looked at those shifts and changes, and they're very clear as you look back over the last 65 years or so. At the root of the funding challenge that we have, and this goes to the question of structure, at the root of the funding challenge that we have is this false divide that we have created between art and entertainment, between nonprofit arts organizations like the Atlanta Symphony and for-profit arts entertainers, or musicians and others. Audiences, by the way, don't generally differentiate between art and entertainment. They prefer a particular artist. They want a particular genre. They're looking for a wonderful experience out. I don't know anybody who says, well, I think I'll go for an art experience tonight, or I'll go, for entertainment. They go to hear an artist. Art, we generally define as work that has been created to express or to provoke or to explore some kind of complex emotional idea or perspective. Generally invites interpretation, it invites reflection, even discomfort from time to time. Entertainment, on the other hand, is created to amuse, to distract, or to please us. It aims for our enjoyment, our relaxation, or our escape. And at Symphony Hall, and I know you're there frequently, we do both. We have programs that are billed as entertainment and those that are billed as art. But again, I don't think audiences focus on those. And I think in order for us to move forward, I think it's a perfect time for us to take down this false divide between art and entertainment, between nonprofit arts organizations, the symphony, and for-profit entities, and to position them so that they can learn from each other and borrow what each industry does best. So let me say it this way, because this would go to the structure. I think that nonprofit arts organizations can really learn a lot about marketing and branding from the entertainment sector. The entertainment sector excels at strong branding, storytelling, data-driven audience development. They are masterful at that. Nonprofit arts organizations are not. And I've had years of experience with that idea. Let's learn from them. Let's borrow what they already know. Diversifying revenue, which again gets to structure. The entertainment industry is far better at developing earned revenue streams through licensing, merchandising, streaming, digital content. Nonprofit arts organizations need to learn those lessons. They need to embrace multiple streams, and they can do it by partnering with and learning from for-profit businesses. Pacing and presentation. The entertainment industry can teach arts organizations how to create audience-focused experiences with superb production values. Audiences expect superb production values. They're loath to sit for 2 or 3 hours quietly and to just listen to something that is subpar or to watch something that is subpar. So I think we can learn a lot from the for-profit industry. And finally, I think that the arts entertainment industry does a far better job at embracing technology. In the 2020 pandemic, COVID era, it forced nonprofit organizations to really embrace digital technology. It was the only way we could stay in touch with audiences. We had to learn to live stream. We had to learn to use Zoom. We had to learn to reach out to people digitally. And the reality is, arts audiences are still about 30% below where they were on a national average, about 30% below where they were before the pandemic. The nonprofit world can learn from the for-profit industry about how to use technology. We may have time later to talk about artificial intelligence and arts organizations. I do a lot of work with arts organizations across the country who start from the premise that artificial intelligence has nothing to offer. It has nothing to offer, and it will have no impact on their work. And the first thing I say to them is, you could not be more wrong. AI has a lot to offer you, and it will impact your work over the next 5 to 10 years, and you need to embrace it. So I think that there's a lot that nonprofits can learn from the for-profit industry. I also think it can go the other way. I think the for-profit industry can learn a lot from nonprofits about the importance of mission and meaning. Arts organizations, nonprofits, could help the for-profit industry integrate deeper social and cultural and educational values into their content. That's important as audiences seek out authenticity and connection. I think nonprofits can bring a lot to the table. They're masters of that. I know this is a little bit of a lightning rod topic, but I think that nonprofits have cornered the market on promoting the value of diversity. I know that's a lightning rod topic right now. I'm going to be careful around it, but I think it's fair to say that nonprofit organizations have a depth of experience in promoting community inclusion, about making people feel welcome and making themselves community oriented. For-profit organizations can broaden their base and they can be more inclusive and more community centric if they follow nonprofit models. I think the other thing, third thing, is long-term artist development. Nonprofits tend to invest in artistic growth and development over time. They invest in artists and they maintain relationships with them. The for-profit industry tends to work on a project by project basis. That's a very different thing. I think those two worlds can come together and that they can teach each other some things that would be valuable for both. And I think finally, and I'll be quiet about this, I think that community engagement is a place where nonprofits excel. And I think they could teach the for-profit industry a lot about how to engage a community, how to make themselves valued by the community and cherished by the community in ways that they are not now. So why not take the best of both worlds, the not-for-profit arts organization world and the for-profit music entertainment world, and use the best of each world to benefit the other? I think the moment is right to fuse the emotional depth of art music with the immediacy of the entertainment world. And if we do this right, and you could, if you do it right, we can create musical experiences that are intellectually rich, that are emotionally relevant, that are financially profitable, which all nonprofit arts organizations need, and that are widely accessible and community-centered. So if you ask me to build a symphony orchestra, I would start with the ideas that I've just expressed to you. It's very easy for traditional nonprofit organizations of all kinds to get caught up in, well, that's not the way we do it, or that's not the way we've done it in the past. They're slow to change. And I think the moment is right now to bring the walls down between art and entertainment and fuse the two worlds. I think it would be to everybody's benefit.
So let me see if I'm understanding this correctly.
Yeah.
The for-profit entertainment world that you're talking about, is that the Taylor Swifts?
Yes. Yes.
All right. So are you proposing that Taylor Swift develop community engagement strategies? Because it doesn't seem like she needs to. She's going to make a ton of money no matter what.
Well, it depends. Yes, I think the Taylor Swifts of the world should develop engagement strategies. I think one of the things from which nonprofit organizations suffer right now is that we have burdened them with community responsibilities that they're not prepared to fulfill. We've said, for instance, I'll use the Atlanta Symphony. We say, you need to provide access and affordability to the arts. Well, what that means in practice is that arts organizations need to provide lots of things for free. They need to provide reduced cost tickets. They need to provide education programs. They need to provide engagement activities. They need to provide those things for free. But the arts organizations have to pay for those things. Somebody has to pay for those things. We keep saying to them, you have to make the arts accessible. I've never heard anybody argue that Taylor Swift has a responsibility to provide access and affordability to the arts. She's a wonderful, wonderful artist. For her Eras tour, I mean, she broke all kinds of world records for revenue generation from that tour. The sort of base level ticket price for that tour was $250. And it went from there up into the thousands, depending upon when and where you bought. If any nonprofit arts organization in Atlanta charged $250 for a regular ticket, there would be lots of complaint, lots of criticism about their lack of commitment to providing access and affordability. Well, I think we ought to say, that's not the arts organization's responsibility, or it's everybody's responsibility. And that's the position that I favor. It's everybody's responsibility. It's Taylor Swift's responsibility and the Zac Brown Band and the Atlanta Symphony. It's all of our responsibility. So how are we going to construct financial models, business models that meet our needs, that pay the bills, but that also make sure that Americans of all kinds can access the arts and access them in an affordable way?
I don't know if you know Steve Hackman, but Steve was a conductor. He was with the Pittsburgh Symphony for a while.
Yeah.
And he would do mashups, for example, between a rock group and classical music.
Right.
So you might hear Brahms and Radiohead mixed together. They're fairly successful. I found them intriguing.
Yeah.
But they didn't fill any classical music seats. Should they have? Is that a wrong expectation to think that they should have filled classical music? Or is it enough simply for him to have that line of business? And if it does well, then it can be used by the classical side. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. And William, I think part of the answer and part of the solution is in the changing nature of audiences. I think that we're rapidly coming to a time in which audiences are more open to, as you called it, the mashup concert that has a piece of this, a little bit of that. Our friends at the New World Symphony in Miami quite often do these concerts that are, it opens with one of the Vivaldi Four Seasons, and then there's a jazz set, and then there is a rock, and it all changes. And while the set changes are going on, there are food and drink vendors around the stage and around the audience area, and you can get a drink and you can get something to eat and then go. It's a wonderful kind of evening. I think that while there will always be a need and a desire for people who want to go to a 3-hour classical concert, they want to hear a full Beethoven symphony, they want to hear those things. I think the way audiences are moving is toward a more interchangeable sort of kaleidoscope experience that is part art and that is part entertainment. And I base that not only on what I read nationally about audiences, but I also base it on what I know about young artists. The young artists with whom I interact in Cincinnati, and they are a wonderful and incredibly talented group of students, aspiring artists. I'll tell you a quick anecdote. In 2020, with the pandemic, we wanted to maintain contact with our alumni. So, we couldn't go to Los Angeles, we couldn't go to New York, couldn't go to Chicago. So we started an online thing. We did some of them at lunchtime, some of them at happy hour. They were called Alumni for Alumni. Small groups, 15 to 20 people. And there was always some just sort of like, oh, William, I haven't seen you since, how are you doing? But there was also some sort of program. There was also like something you could hear about, participate in. And we invited one of our alums, Ashley Kate Adams. She does a thing called BYOP, Be Your Own Producer. And she said, hi, I'm Ashley Kate Adams. I, graduated from CCM in theater, went to New York City, was, auditioned, was cast in a revival of La Cage aux Folles, got into rehearsals. I thought, I'm living my dream. And the week before we were to open, we closed. The financing fell apart. And she said, I was out of work. I needed to reinvent myself. And she told this wonderful story about the way she did it. And she said, let me ask all of you on there in the chat line, please, how do you describe yourself as an artist? And, and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, do I say I'm a singer, I'm an administrator, I'm a musicologist? I was looking for the one word descriptor. And I glanced down at the chat line and the answers were getting longer and longer. And every other person on that line, these people were all in their 20s and early 30s, described themselves as, I'm a producer, I'm a voiceover, I'm a singer, I play, I have a podcast. They had this multiplicity. I learned it was called a multi-hyphenated career. And I went back to my faculty colleagues and I said, if you think for a moment that our students are going to continue to come to CCM to say, I want to play the violin. That's the only thing I want to do. I want to play the violin. You're wrong. That's not the way in which the world is moving. And when you talk to artists in their 20s and 30s, they want to be producers and directors and writers and podcast hosts. They want to do all of that. And I think that too is pushing the change in audiences and in the way the arts world will operate. And I think it's very exciting. I think about what that could mean for an organization like the Atlanta Symphony. I think it could open them, into wonderful, wonderful new worlds that would keep their classical core, but that would allow them to bridge out and explore all kinds of other wonderful things. And I think that's the way artists are going, and I think that's the way audiences will go over the next 5 to 10 years.
All right. Have you worked also in the visual arts?
Not really. Not really. No, at one point earlier in my career, I was the director of the Baltimore School for the Arts, which includes the visual arts as one of its disciplines. So I'm knowledgeable, but I've never worked particularly in the visual arts field, like at a place like the High Museum or anything like that.
It seems to me that the very nature of arts organizations being nonprofit puts a particular burden to do things in the community that the for-profits don't have. And so that almost forces the nonprofits to find sources of income that are willing to support those other things that you may not have in the for-profit sector. So for the for-profits, they may be happy not to get involved in community engagement, but the nonprofits have no choice. They have to, just by virtue of them being nonprofit.
Well, yeah, it depends. Our nonprofits are non. My argument would be that if we could adopt a new business model, if we could actually learn from the for-profit industries, how to do things better, if we could learn to diversify revenue streams, if we could become more technology friendly, if we could be open to a different kind of audience experience, I think we could, if you will, become less nonprofit. And I think with the lessening of that burden, we could also say maybe it's all of our responsibility to have that level of community engagement, or we could say somebody else needs to assume that. We in the arts world have assumed a large role for arts education because the school said, well, we can't afford to do it, or we don't want to do it for whatever reason. We're going to cut those programs. And the arts organization stepped in and said, well, we'll assume the responsibility. Well, we did that out of choice. I'm not sure it was the wisest choice. There's always the temptation to step in where there's a void and say, we think this is really important, we'll take care of it. But then you have to continually bend your organization around the needs and demands of that obligation that you've just assumed. I'm going to go back to this idea for just a minute. You asked me to think about the funding, and one of the things that I came to was over the last 60 years, we've passed around, as an American society, we've passed around responsibility for funding the arts like it was like we were playing a game of hot potato. You can start with government funding in 1965 when Congress, led by President Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, created the two national endowments, the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities. President Johnson did that because he saw it as a valuable tool in his war on poverty and as a tool against illiteracy, which he thought was a blight on America and something that we absolutely needed to address. Well, since that time of looking at could the government take a leading role, and I think Congress at that point wisely said, this is not only a federal obligation, but there's a state requirement. Which is why you have a Georgia Council for the Arts and a Georgia Council for the Humanities. The federal government said, we can't do this alone. We have to have the states in it with us. But since that time, we have played hot potato with saying, government can't do it. What about private industry? Well, private industry doesn't want to do it. What about philanthropy? Philanthropy can't do it. What about the arts organizations? There was a whole move, for around 2008. The conversation was about capacity building. What that meant was get off the dole. stop being a nonprofit. Stop, soliciting all these donations. You need to learn to be more self-reliant. What can you do to earn revenue? So we've continued to sort of pass this thing around, and we're now down to this sort of, we've come full cycle. In 65, we said the government can play a primary role, and we created the two endowments. And 60 years later, 2025, we're saying we're going to eliminate both of those endowments. We don't think the federal government should have any role in supporting the arts. So I think that we've come full circle, which again, I think opens up the possibility for us to say, let's think differently about how we do this. Let's think differently about what obligations we really must assume and want to assume toward the community, toward art, toward audiences. And let's think about how we can fund this in a way that fulfills everybody's needs.
I did notice that with some of the proposed cuts that are being discussed, for example, in job training,
Yeah,
local industries have often said, oh, we'll step in and give the money for the job training, which is fine. It also takes, if we think job training is a societal responsibility,
right.
takes responsibility out of government to actually do that. So in some ways, I don't support doing that. I think that if they don't want to support job training, I'm not sure industry or philanthropy should step in and do it either.
Right.
So we are on the cusp of having to make those decisions if the
Yeah,
budget cuts go through as they're here.
So I appreciate you raising that, William, because I think it's my contention. We are at a moment of real possibility and of profound change.
Right.
And that in lots of areas, job training, the arts, we are going to have to say to ourselves, we think this is important, and we're going to fund it through this mechanism. I think sadly, from my perspective, what we as a country have said about the arts over the last 60 years is we really don't value the arts very much.
Right.
Now, we value entertainment highly.
Yes, we're willing to pay
entertainment
anything
highly.
to be entertained.
Right.
Yes.
Yes. And that's why I'm thinking, okay, what is it we can learn from the entertainment industry, from the entertainment world? What is it we can borrow from them that can help us do the kinds of things that we think are valuable and important?
Excellent. Anything you want to close with?
One of the things that you asked me was, what advice would you give to somebody who's going into to arts management? And I thought about it, and I thought, here's what I would say. Be passionate about the art, be exceptionally curious, and always, always, always keep your eye on the finances. If you can make the budget work, everything else is possible. If you can't make the budget work, nothing else is possible. So be passionate about the art, but always keep your eye on the finances. I wish I had embraced that more wholeheartedly early on in my career.
Thank you very much.
William, it's been a real pleasure to talk with you.
Great talking with you.
Thanks so
Hey,
much.
thanks a lot. Take
You're
care
welcome.
now.